We are back on RLC Consultervations. We've had a couple of apologies from some of our regulars due to the USA stimulus package going out live with many lenders this week, and some of our usual friends having to prioritize supporting businesses to get the money they qualify for from government funding and stimulus in the USA. So best of luck to all of those involved in that process. And I do believe, nothing to be alarmed about, George Powers is at the doctor's. So let's wish him good health too. Back by popular demand is our ever ready two friends, Kevin Turnbull from RLC LA, president of RLC Los Angeles, probably the grandest name we've got in our toolkit, and also VP of our consult training program and movement in the US. And back again is Eric Swick, Mr. Reliable himself, Swick Business Strategies, the man who's got a plan. Eric and Kevin, welcome back with us on Consultervations once again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
So we had quite a heavy session last week, didn't we, about the leadership rules and the 7 RLC daily leadership principles that you can apply in any business. And we got up to, didn't we, number 6, which was about recruiting, retaining, rewarding, and developing your people. First things first, chaps, what do you think about this? How important is it to get this one right?
Oh, I mean, it's so important to any organization because, I've been a leader of an organization and you're so dependent on your team to really execute your plan or your goals or your vision. And so having the right people on the bus is so critical.
Yeah, I agree. I come across companies all the time whose recruitment is frankly desperate. They recruit the wrong way. They're not looking for the right people. They're impressed by kind of CVs instead of, fit to the team and the like. And in addition to that, I would say that a lot of people don't know how to onboard new employees. They focus on kind of pay and rations instead of culture and things like that. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I often talk to clients about, it's not so much when you're hiring someone what they know as opposed to who they are. Because if you don't get someone that really fits in with your culture and your organization, I don't care what they know, it's going to be a disruption typically, and they're not going to last very long. So to me, I like to see people hire for who people are, because you can't change who they are. But you definitely can change and teach them what they need to know and build skill sets and things like that. So I agree.
Yeah, I agree. I used to work for Ford a long time ago, and they brought in a new policy and decided to bring in MBAs, as kind of at a fairly decent level of seniority. And I'm talking about the 1980s here, so MBAs weren't exactly thick on the ground, but you got the feeling that the recruitment was all about the person's education, not whether they would fit in with the team. And I'd been at Ford for a few years by that time as a graduate trainee and worked up, come up through the ranks, climbed the slippery pole, and all that good stuff. Yeah. And these companies came in with no understanding of the culture and an expectation that they would just leap ahead of everyone else. And of course, that pissed everyone else off, excuse my French. And it was because people didn't define what they were looking for and did a shocking job of onboarding them.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a really important point though, isn't it, onboarding? Because it's the bit where it's like sales. You sold a dream and then suddenly they join, don't they? And does it match up to what was sold in the process?
Yeah, that's right. In fact, I this came up with a client no more than 4 months ago, where after going through some various processes, they went from a non-onboarding strategy to quite a comprehensive one. Training, pay and rations. What do they need to do? How do we work here? What the team is. But there was one glaring omission, and that is, who's going to tell them what the company believes in? Who we are, what is our why as a company, and why do you fit in with the team? And ideally, this should be some senior executive, or in a small business, usually the CEO, to sit down and tell that new recruit, this is what we believe in, this is who you've joined, you're a perfect fit, you're going to do really well. And getting those cultural things in place are essential in any successful onboarding program to me.
Yeah.
How many jobs have you had though, Kevin, right, where you've experienced somebody owning that process and getting it absolutely right? I can only recall one in my entire career where somebody had really thought about it, and for 3 whole months, nothing was more important than getting the induction correct. Not even skill, not even are you competent yet, just you absolutely get this, who we are, what we're about, and the difference you can add and where. Only once for me. What about you, Kevin and Eric?
I would say that my very first job out of college was like that, where they did do that, but that was the exception to the rule, and that was many years ago. But it was more of a large corporation that still had that family feel, because it had been a large corporation that was a family-owned business for many, many generations. But you're right, it's not typical. It's not typical.
No, not at all. Funnily enough, Eric, the first company I joined, they had a fairly comprehensive induction program, and that was appreciated, even though it didn't really match reality. But let's skip over that.
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of jobs, and worked for large corporations and small businesses, and done startups and IPOs and all of that sort of stuff. And I think it's a truism that the more senior you become, the more you just chucked in to the deep end of the swimming pool. And I've done some pretty senior jobs, and it's a kind of, yeah, welcome on board. Here's your company car, and there's your office, and get on with it.
Yeah.
No induction at all. You might have a brief chat with the CEO, and that was about it.
Yeah. See, my first experience was I was in a management training program, so they invested in me for an entire year to develop me and have me learn and understand all the workings of the business. So that was a unique situation, I think. And you don't see those kinds of situations now as you did back in I won't tell you what century that was.
No, Eric, it was just the other day. Anyway, the interesting thing is there's a consequence to rule number 6 that's quite severe.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what most people forget in a cultural transformation. So when a cultural transformation sounds far too strategic and intelligent, right? What it is where you're taking a culture from one place and you're either adapting it, changing it, or evolving it into another place, right? Ideally better. Would that be fair, right?
Yeah.
There's 2 things that happen in that process. People will eventually, I think it's this hand, prefer the old way more than the new initially in that first phase. And it's normal. So they're going to jostle, they're going to attempt to switch it back, create justifications. I think back to moments when I was much younger, and you see people, myself included, making a New Year's resolution, which is a silly idea initially. And they make that decision, and then they justify somebody else's behavior to switch back. Oh, it's because of you, Kevin, I'm now breaking all my resolutions. And people do the same with culture. And in that moment, when you switch back, or you seldom hold your nerve enough, the wrong people leave your organization.
Yeah.
The people who are there to build a better version, usually, fairly quickly, Kevin, in my experience, exit.
I think that's right. Well, I worked for a big company earlier in my career, and we had a terrible turnover of graduate trainees, and so we got together a group of managers, including myself, to work in a kind of pilot investigative sort of a role, and we found out basically that we were recruiting people like us. So this was a sales and marketing group. So if you know anything about Myers-Briggs, we were all on the extrovert side, BSs basically, and that's who we were recruiting. And in that sort of environment, loads of people left because it was too competitive, and it didn't reflect that even in a sales and marketing group, we needed people with better analytical skills, not just soft people skills. So we needed introverts to think more deeply about our strategy and where we were going. And it seems obvious saying that now, but for us at the time, it was a revelation. It was.
I can imagine. Just want to interrupt you, Kevin. Doug Holstead is giving us a big shout out. We're looking forward to Doug being back with us. Debbie's making a guest appearance as she comes to collect her lights, which you need, of course, living in a glen in Scotland where there are none other than the ones in where you live. But Doug's talking about we're knocking out the park. Thank you for the soul food, Doug. We really appreciate that. Kevin, going back to your bell bin thing for a second, right? Is that I remember I've only ever personally been a delegate in what I would consider to be a really great team building exercise once. And that was Belbin Team Dynamics all those years ago. And I found it a bit like the Myers-Briggs initially, very reliable, where people were discovering what type of team player they were through the Belbin theory. And it was pretty accurate. It was a couple that was slightly scruffy for most people. But what I found that was stretching was not only did you get a better understanding, but the assessors then made you do the things that you were crap at. And part of my job was to do this event where you've probably heard of it, Kevin, right? Where you've got an oar, a boat, you've got a team, a rope, one pulley, and a second oar to sit on. You're not allowed to touch the boat. You've got to get everybody across this lake or like wide river, across the other side and back again in one piece without getting wet. Well, of course, when they gave that to me and said, your first task is to assess all of these pieces and work out how to link them together, I generally sat there going, Anyway, fast forward, everybody was submerged in water. We sunk the opposition, the other team, we took them out. And it became a wrestle rather than a team building exercise. And it turns out at the end, because there was two of you at the same time, North and South, being told to do the same thing, the actual metaphor was if you'd all put your tools together as two teams, you'd have had two of everything. It'd have been a giant circle. But no, it didn't work like that.
Yeah.
It's something about, isn't there, being in a frightening, uncomfortable zone. But for me, I have to tell you, I found that terrifying. So what we're talking about here is real team building, real recruiting the right people, retaining them and rewarding them. And please, if you're leading a company today, and we'll come straight back to Eric and Kevin in a second, stop letting the right people leave first. What a waste of their time, yours and people's lifetime to do that to them in the first place. Sometimes it can't be helped, I'm sure. So shall we have a look at number 7? So number 7 is execute the plan. What do you initially observe about this rule? What does it not say first? And this is a bit like Catchphrase, the TV show. What does it not say? Say what you see, Kevin.
Develop. Does it say develop the plan?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
There's an assumption. There's a plan. Now, sometimes that plan might have to change. If you think about a startup that takes off, and 2 years in, how many times have you seen that, Katie and Eric, where somebody starts out the blocks brilliantly, and then all of a sudden, all the things they've not built yet start falling down?
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. All the things they've not built yet starts falling down.
It's a polite way of saying it, isn't it?
Yeah.
But what do you think is the best way to build a plan, chaps?
Well, I'm biased, but I think using a framework that we use is the best way to build a plan, where you look at, where are you at today and where do you want to be tomorrow? And there's going to be always a gap. And it's figuring out, okay, how do I bridge that gap? What do I need to do to make that happen? That's where your plan comes out of that exercise.
Absolutely. And I absolutely agree with you. I think our framework process is pretty brilliant, and it's quite thorough, actually. Yet, why is there a problem with executing, do you think?
Well, I think in the main, the companies that I come across, their plans are pretty sketchy. It's usually a kind of, well, we'll do what we did last year. It's a kind of operationally led and numbers led. Are we doing okay in the numbers, or the plan must be working even when they haven't got a plan? And to develop the plan takes a kind of an executive who is looking up, looking into the future, looking at possible roadblocks in the way, which could be technology and AI and all sorts of pandemics, could be all sorts of things, and anticipating what could be out there and how to get around it in advance. That's when you're developing a plan, because trying to execute a plan that you don't have, it's pretty difficult.
Yeah. But what I find, Dave, is even when they have developed a plan or what they think is a plan, it's the execution side that always falls short. And I find from my experiences, it's being held accountable, having someone that holds you accountable to delivering what you said you're going to do. I've seen so many people. In fact, I have one client I'm working with right now who went through kind of a visionary day workshop. And, they've got all these great ideas on what they want to do for the business, but there's no one holding the leader accountable to making sure that they implement it. And there's no details to the plan. A lot of times I see high level thoughts. Yes, we want to grow revenue by this percentage. Yes, we want to have this many more customers or clients, but there's no thought process and no accountability on, well, how do we get there? What are the steps? Because everything takes steps, multiple steps to accomplish something. And, as Kevin was talking about, it's developing that plan and having the details of it. But I often say it's really, what's going to motivate someone to really make it happen.
100%, because what we mustn't make accountability is we mustn't make accountability a myth, right? I was talking to Colette Bell earlier today, and we were talking about a very simple idea that one of the secrets to really great accountability is that it's an implied consent, where sometimes as a coach, you don't even have to ask it because we've agreed it. So you'll often show up and say, here's where I'm at, right? And then you can retain that coaching collaboration through accountability, as opposed to just the really bland, Kevin, you said, did you? And sometimes it's got to get to that. But I think it's using accountability as an implied consent is a really nice way, making it relationship centered. So when you're executing a plan, we all know what the boundaries and the rules are, which make the conversation an awful lot easier. Now, can we do something quite challenging? So I'm going to go to our website where we did publish this blog last week, because I absolutely want to cover a very specific thing. And that is how these 7 leadership rules can be adapted to reflect real-time well-being. So, and I think if people are watching this, they'll make quite a bit of sense of the actual blog itself. So if you want to know where that blog site is, we're displaying it right now on the live feed. And it's www.rlc-global.com. Go to blogs, and we're talking about the one that's 7 ways to be an intentional leader. And what we've done here, Kevin and Eric, is we're looking at each of these rules, right? And we're saying, how do you link them to well-being? And I'll go through the first one. Kevin and Eric, I'd like you to pick one, right? Because we haven't got time to do all 7 of these. But, for me, modeling the behavior you want from others first, I'm going to start there because it's a huge one for me, along with doing what it is you say you're going to do and all sorts of other things, right? So we talk about the link first. So the link is, if you're only modeling a strength mindset and you're forgetting to show vulnerability, empathy, weakness, compassion, you're most likely going to find nobody is going to mirror that. No one is going to follow that lead. Would you agree, chaps?
Absolutely.
So,
or what I would say is they may follow, but it's not really what you want them to be following, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
So there's a chance here to really think about how do you set the right model in, Eric, isn't it? And at the same time, the tip we're providing is show candor, show encouragement, show vulnerability. It's not vulnerability. I always think that sometimes you can classically think vulnerability is your ability to be completely comfortable, crying your eyes out, sobbing, and it's none of those things. It's as a communication tool, are you letting people know it's okay to be anxious at the moment? And to encourage.
I mean, I think as a leader, I think as a leader, it's important to say, hey, I don't have all the answers,
Yeah.
I want to collaborate with everyone to get the best solution. I think that's showing some vulnerability, because as a leader, you don't always have to have all the answers.
100%. Is there one that stands out to you, Kevin, next? So we've got have a story, enable your people to act, remove the obstacles. Is the one you want to pick as a link and a tip that maybe stands out to you, Katie?
I think have a story to me gets to the heart of this whole discussion about executive wellness.
Yeah.
Have a story is kind of centered around an RLC concept of fuel tanks and fuel gauges. We each have a spiritual, emotional, and physical fuel tank that it's important to monitor for yourself, and it's important to monitor the people that you work with. For example, I've got a client, CEO of a business owned by private equity. It's been on the block for a while, so that the owners are trying to sell it. And the CEO, his physical and emotional fuel gauges are reading close to zero. And that's dragging down the spiritual side of him. And I see him because I talk to him a couple of times a month, and I see him at the end of our conversation. Well, it's the beginning of the conversation, because I do try and motivate him. But when I see him, he looks tired. His eyes are sunken. And I basically tell him that, look, you've got to look after your fuel gauges, and you're not getting any help from your board, who are the money people, who basically couldn't care. But he cares about himself, and he does care about his employees deeply. He's a very good executive. But I have to keep dragging him back into this story of, look, you're just a human being. You're suffering in a locked up pandemic-led environment, and you've got a very difficult assignment of helping this business to be sold. And so there's a big unknown in front of you. So his fuel gauges need to be. I look at them for him, and tell him that he's getting to critical levels at some time.
Yeah.
And you can't give what you haven't got, can you?
No, exactly right. When you're running on empty, firstly, as you say, Dave, you've got nothing much extra to give, but also people around you recognize that.
Absolutely.
They can see that you're a low ebb, and therefore your leadership dynamic is being, quite severely being brought back down. Does that make sense, Eric?
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you 1,000%.
You gave me a quote there, Eric and Kevin. Running on empty means the next station is stop.
Yeah. And
that's exactly it. You lose all your momentum, won't you? Eric, which one of these stands out to you at the moment? So as you look at the link to well-being.
So it's funny, I don't mean to go in order here, but the one that really hits me is enable your people to act. Because if you don't, I feel that there's a lot of anxiety in the organization, and they hold back, and they're not sure, can I do this? Is it okay? What's the repercussions of my actions if I do this? If they're always having to look over their shoulder, they're not going to be successful. They're not going to portray the image that you really want them to your customers or your clients. So I think, enabling your people to act is so important. And I think that ties into the story, right? Because if everyone understands what your story is and what you're all about, that's the beginning of it, right? That they understand that they're part of this story. And then it's a matter of just giving them permission, giving them permission to take risk, permission to try new things. I think it's so important. And if you look at what people want in their jobs, That's what I'm hearing. That's what I hear they want. They want that ability to act. And, I think most people, when they do fail, it wasn't on a malicious basis anyway. It was because they thought it was the right thing and they wanted to help the business. And so they always have good intent, and you have to believe in that.
And I think there's loads of great leaders in business today, in organizations in all shapes and sizes, who do this instinctively, right? Mm-hmm. But they might be doing it as a lone ranger or a lone wolf, or in silo, and therefore they stand out as a good thing, or sometimes as a pest, right? Because I always go back to many years ago, wanting a dashboard for KPIs. Wow, a long time ago, when it was first a capability, Kevin, right, in large organizations, when they were starting to provide this data. And I remember discovering something that if you're part of a group team and you want something, there's always a bigger business question to ask, which is, well, if it's going to improve what I'm doing, could it improve what everybody's doing? And therefore, suddenly, Kev, a normal project overnight could become a large project, couldn't it? If it's going to make a massive difference. And what often people do, when you see naturally people doing this, enabling people to act, what often happens is they do it in this microcosm. Whereas if it's a large organization, it's a natural place to teach people to say, listen, if you come across something that's going to help us all act better, let's see if it's scalable, and let's do an even better job that permanently makes the change. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. What I feel is really important is that has to be believed throughout the organization. Yeah. Because what I find is a lot of times the upper management believes that. It's the middle management that sometimes gets in the way because they're threatened by their people.
No, I have to agree with you, right? I have to just pull up another LinkedIn comment. Somebody called Dave Evans said, "Go, go, go, Team RLC." That's clever, isn't it? I managed to do that at the same time. But I think you're right. It's got to be a belief that's shared, Eric, as part of the process. I think it's super important. Ken Blanchard's got a new book out called The Heart of the Leader, and he spends a large chunk of time about talking about leadership rule number 5, which is encouraging the heart of the organization. But I think this year that's not going to become not the book, that principle is not going to suddenly become critical. It is only going to become a necessity, because people are having, the world over, a tough time. Yeah. So we've got to anticipate the effect of that on people, I think.
Yeah,
I agree, and I think a lot of it's about sharing and openness. Sharing the strategy, sharing the culture. A long time ago, when I did an MBA, I wrote that there was a thing in the early 90s called executive information systems. So it was an IT-led data thing to give executives kind of unique information about how their organization was developing. And I did quite a lot of research on it, original research on it. I had the thing sponsored by an EIS company, but my conclusion was that this was all rubbish. Yeah. That, giving senior executives, CEOs and the like, this unique access to information about their company without sharing to anyone else was actually self-defeating. Yeah. So I called EIS instead of executive information system. I said it's wrong. It should be everyone's information system. It should be shared and it should be open, and that drives the culture that you want in today's environment.
Yeah, great.
That needs no comment, Kevin. It's absolutely right. It's true though. In the same way, we talk about other things that bring balance to well-being. Some of the divisive language around inclusivity and diversity across the world, and where it's not addressed properly at the root cause of an organization's belief system. And one of the items that I often fall out with people when I'm invited to talk about this is pay gaps, in large structured organizations where people have all kinds of opinions around the gender split pay gap. I'm not going into that right now at the end of this broadcast, but one of the things that I believe large companies should take out of the interview process is the ability of the hirer and the person looking for the role to negotiate salary. you create friction. And there shouldn't be scales either. There shouldn't be these versions. Eric is a F1 and I'm an F2, right? And Kevin's clearly an A, right? So there shouldn't be
clearly,
yeah, exactly. I got it right, didn't I, Kevin? But the thing is, though, A should be A. If you're an A grade job role, the salary band should be set. We take money off the table. And actually, we focus on the things that matter. I was talking to somebody this week whose company pays off a commission pool. And some people have said, well, I haven't earned commission for ages. This is brilliant, right? They've not adjusted any of the base salaries. This is about retaining people, right?
Right.
And therefore, the people who are earning it are sharing their commission for those that aren't very good. And actually, that would work if you addressed the lowest salary bands. And it was just a one-pay system. So it's fascinating how we systemically create our own problems in these processes that, frankly, don't even need to be there in this day and age.
Yeah.
I think that's right. I think pay is very emotive as well, and for many reasons. I think the bigger the organization, the more they get it wrong.
Yeah.
You kind of because you hear stories internally, don't you? The gossip. You've got your finger on the pulse, and all of a sudden you know that bonuses were dished out to that lot of people, but not to us. Very divisive. Because there's often no rhyme or reason behind it all.
Absolutely. And then you add to that myth, legend, and mistake. Some of it happened.
But all of this goes right back to the framework of the company, the way that they're set up to succeed. Because if you don't have that kind of master framework, particularly in a large organization, then what happens is that individual departments and business activities develop their own mini frameworks for themselves. So they set goals for themselves and so on and so forth. But it could be at complete odds with another department next door. So they're not all walking the same or running the same way. They're kind of doing their own thing, often at the disadvantage of the whole. So you see it all the time, and that's reflected in pay. Where some divisions have this, some divisions have that. Marketing is this, sales is that, operations is something else, often nothing, and it's inequitable.
But it's interesting, Dave, that you bring up compensation because I've read studies over the years that when you ask employees what's most important to their satisfaction in their job, it's always way down on the list. It's not number one. And so it's focusing on those other things on the list, which, these 7 principles tend to focus on, that are more important than compensation. I agree that it needs to be fair and it needs to be, no prejudice built into it, but it's not the most important thing if you're going to get it right.
And I only have one last comment on it, and that is, if you've got people that you want to do better, there's a pretty safe formula, I think, that captures most of this, and that is get the money right, plus self-value of the employee, plus their desire to make a difference will work harmoniously. Yep. Mess the money up, the other two are out of the game.
Yeah.
So it's quite simple. I also want to finish off with a challenge while we've got a minute or so to go. Kevin and Eric, do you know what an energist is?
An energist? Is this a new word of yours?
It is a new word of mine. Yeah, I've got 2 new words. Next week, I'm going to talk about an ultimist. But today, we're going to do an energist. Yeah, and I added it to my computer's dictionary today, officially.
Yeah, to me, an energist, it sounds like someone that's just got a lot of energy and shares that energy with others.
So I've added it to the screen because Kevin was just about to mind read. It is the act of applying energy and commitment to your intentionality of the day you are in. And I like to ask people to become energists with their own focus, with their own actions, with their own frameworks, and to take real action with intention this year, which we've been talking about throughout January so far. So any last comments from you wonderful, wise gentlemen? So Eric, any last comments you want to make today on Consultervation?
Not really. I think, we covered a lot of ground here and last week that I hope people go to the website and get this blog, because I think it's really important, all 7 principles for people to be successful.
Yeah, good shout. Mr. Turnbull, sir.
Yeah, I have a tip of the day.
Right.
One of my favorite interviewing questions is this. So, Dave, when you work in a team, what role do you play? And it's a deep question, because people want to answer as leader all the time because they want to show leadership qualities. But almost always people are honest about it, particularly when you give them some choices. It could be leader, it could be strategist, it could be the guy that cranks the handle, it could be the scribe, it could be all sorts of things. And so you often get an honest answer back, and that gives you an insight into whether that person will fit to your team.
That's a great tip, given all the things we've spoken about today. I'd like to thank you, Eric, for your time. Kevin, you too, my friend. And as we bring this episode towards a close, loads to think about. 2 challenges. If you're doing an interview in the next week or the not too distant future, take that question and put it into direct action. So, name, when you work in a team, what role do you play? And then get ready to probe and ask and find out, and really pay attention to how they answer you, and also believability in their answer. Next up, of course, we'll be back next week with a whole new take on leadership as we go into, I think it's the worst credit card of the day is coming up. Credit card bill day on Monday is coming up soon. So the world is going to need us to help them reframe and see the future going into February. And lots that we've gone through today in terms of quality content. The second challenge is join us in our Energist challenge, which is go and be somebody who is intentional in the day they're in, for themselves, with commitment, and for the people that they lead also. This has been Consultervation. Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Kevin.